and gleaning meaningful insights from in-flight and legacy transactions. Outside of being a consultative service, over the years, we've recognized that wrapping that functionality into technology was something that the legal departments and the marketplace at large was wanting. Often we find that legal teams are making do with existing tools, but often do not invest readily in new technologies and seeking efficiencies and improving their day-to-day activities. One common trend that we've noticed over the past 3 years is that the legal department is stretched thin. It's addressing many needs across the enterprise, whether contracting or not contracting, but many of these processes are manual, managed on an ad hoc basis, and are not really scalable with every passing period. That's what ContractPod at large is designed to address. It's arming legal teams with all the necessary functionalities to manage the pre-execution and post-execution processes as they relate to contracting. But as you will see today, leveraging our core functionalities within the platform, intake questionnaires to capture details surrounding the ask, being able to capture those answers and through a dynamic workflow, route the resulting work to the affected stakeholders automatically, and then having an AI-powered repository that can help you find salient details with a couple of clicks, also giving you the infrastructure to slice and dice the data to find some trends that might be top of mind from the business. All of that is empowering the legal team to be more proactive as opposed to reactive, setting up scalable processes that can reap dividends over time, and ultimately giving you visibility into the key moving parts and the outcomes to protect your organization's bottom line. I realize that I've said a lot in a very brief period of time, but my goal today is to show you these relevant functionalities within the platform, what we've been working on here at ContractPod over the past 12 months. And not only showing you our built-in functionalities, but showing you how we could leverage some existing tools that you might have in circulation today to avoid excessive change management and to really hit the ground running with efficiencies based on where you're currently at and what ContractPod brings to the table. I'll second what Colin mentioned in the chat team. Throughout today's conversation, please don't hesitate to ask the hard-hitting questions that are top of mind, or if I gloss over something that piques your interest within the platform, have no hesitations interrupting me in my tracks, and I'll do my best to attend to the chat as we go through the presentation today. Colin, anything else top of mind from you, or should we dive right in?
It's taken a while for this to come on. You can jump right in. We can ask questions then throughout. Thanks, Fighter.
Excellent. Team, often the hardest part of these types of presentations is anyone having issues seeing what I'm currently sharing from my side of things. Thank you, Carlos. If that changes anybody, let us know. And Shani, thank you for the comment. I wish I could take the credit, but all credit goes to our product team. Immediately, just a couple of overarching statements before we dive into the platform in question. First, we are flexible in terms of the visual experience between a light theme and a dark theme. And we work with organizations to tailor the look and feel of the platform according to their style guides. What you're looking at is the platform in question. Welcome to the ContractPod cloud system. We are a software as a service platform that is entirely online hosted, meaning no local installations are necessary when we consider deploying this platform across various stakeholder groups within your organization. Additionally, we pride ourselves at ContractPod at providing a no-code platform for our clients. We're very passionate that a tool must be helpful and it cannot become a second full-time job for the legal team or the contracting team. I bring this up because not only is our platform very granular from a roles and permissions-based perspective to tailor the experience for requesters, the contracting team, and senior stakeholders, but if we dive into the administrative backend of our platform, all of these administrative functionalities and the key features that you will witness today are fully self-administrable by our clients through this backend. As you navigate to a pertinent feature or functionality, you will see that we've implemented wizards to guide you through all the important considerations when, for instance, creating a new user role and extending rights and permissions to that profile, or some of the other administrative facets, such as the governing process, which you can build and modify through our workflow designer, playbooks that help your team make sense of current language as it compares to your preferred positions, whether in third-party agreements or red lines on your paper. All of this is something at your control and at your fingertips for you to adjust as requirements shift, instead of us as a vendor holding you back from an administrative perspective. A lot of this will make more sense as we dive through some concrete, tangible examples, but if there are any pointed questions to the administrative aspects of our platform, don't hesitate to bring those up before we conclude today. To structure this conversation, one of the things that we've recognized at ContractPod, especially over the past 2 years, is that the legal department is being pulled in a lot of different directions. And in polling our colleagues on the contracting team across different industries and verticals, we know that one of the main headaches that legal departments are wrestling with is scarcity. Scarcity in having tenured attorneys that know common negotiation themes and preferences for the business. There are challenges with bringing new attorneys up to speed based on legacy transactions and in-flight work. And there are also those manual processes where the legal team currently struggles in effectively managing requests from all sides of the business, whether contract related or things that are outside of contracting. At the ContractPodAi platform, we want to give that control back to legal teams and to arm you with the tools to build scalable and repeatable processes for now and many periods to come. To see a process, I want to first begin with showing you how a system user can kickstart a contracting request within our platform, but then I'll show you some other methods of capturing requests from an intake perspective and how ContractPod can connect various arms of the business together. Within our platform, it all begins with me submitting a request to accomplish something specific. Based on my roles and permissions within the system, our platform will present a series of contract types. The goal is for the requester to select what it is they're trying to accomplish at this current time. For instance, I want to author a master services agreement using the ContractPodAi tool. Based on the contract type that I've selected, your team can curate the different options that are presented to a requester to eliminate some options that might not apply for a particular contract type, to relabel these things to align with your internal terminology and nomenclature. All of that helps reduce change management and make this an intuitive experience for the various people interacting with ContractPod. In this case, I, as a requester, am trying to author an agreement on our paper. This is where you're going to see one of the key functionalities within our platform, especially from the intake perspective. Your organization will have full flexibility at curating intake questionnaires depending on the underlying ask. In other words, the questions you see on the screen and the type of information we're soliciting from the requester is completely up to you, and you will be able to define these intake questionnaires as extensive or as limited to your specifications within the administrative backend. These examples happen to capture the commercial aspects for this contract, and I'll begin by outlining the counterparty. If we have an existing relationship with a particular organization, those entities can be managed directly within our platform, or most commonly, we could pull vendor information from a procurement tool to drive data hygiene and consistently across your contracting needs. Next, I'll do the same thing for our organization. And this is where if there are multiple business units or entities involved, this list will reflect all the contracting entities for your organization. After capturing some of the details for this contract type, I want to point your attention briefly to this question here. I think what this illustrates is how we could keep the process very intuitive and simple from the requester, having them focus on communicating the moving parts, while on the back end, at the workflow level, our tool can pay attention to these answers and, if necessary, react automatically. In fact, at the workflow level for this contract type, we have a spending control, where if this request exceeds a certain amount, this is going to go through a more stringent workflow. Anything under a certain spend goes through a more typical process. What you will see is that at the workflow level, we can build in dynamic logic that the software pays attention to and reacts accordingly when various conditions are met. This removes the onus from your contracting and legal team to police the process and determine who needs to be involved. And instead, this is something that the software can manage automatically, preserving your team's bandwidth while still ensuring that the right stakeholders are engaged at the right time for oversight and approvals with your contracts. Continuing with this intake questionnaire, after I fill out some of the commercial aspects for this contract, you'll notice that the final page is going to ask me questions that are specific to the contract type itself. From an authoring perspective, we have the opportunity to ask pointed questions related to the agreement, and based on how a requester responds, we can insert the relevant language into the initial draft of this contract automatically. This is a good example of our authoring capabilities, what ContractPod calls our auto contracting desk tool. The ability to ask pointed questions during the intake phase, and based on how the requester responds, building the initial draft of the agreement without any manual intervention, while ensuring that all the appropriate language in line is included by the tool. To bring this full circle, after I fill out these questions and click this button, our tool is going to pay attention to the details volunteered by the requester. It will route the request to the necessary next step based on the workflows that you implement within our tool. And a few seconds later, I, as the legal contracting team member, have access to the initial draft of the agreement, as well as all the necessary functionalities to manage the entirety of the pre-execution process directly within the ContractPod tool. I want to take a pause there and invite any questions about what you've seen so far into the meeting chat. As we're collecting some feedback from the group, I wanted to contrast this example with integrations from an intake perspective, because one of the things that we recognize at ContractPod is that forcing people to change their behaviors to interact with a new tool can be a disservice to overall adoption and making this a successful investment for your organization. In short, the software has to be flexible and has to meet people where they are currently working for it to bring relief to the organization. So let's suppose that instead of me beginning a process as a system user within ContractPod, I, as a member of the business, was originating the request from an existing system, for instance, Salesforce. With our integration approach, we could bridge the gap between tools you currently have and the ContractPod system to make it an intuitive experience for requesters, even if the origin is a different system like Salesforce. To bring this to life, on the right-hand side of the screen, you are seeing an example of what this integration could look like for your sales team within Salesforce. Interacting with the ContractPod tool can then be a question of a couple of clicks in seconds. For example, if I, as a salesperson, needed to generate one of those high volume but low complexity contract types at the beginning of a relationship with my client, such as a non-disclosure agreement, instead of me sending a request to the legal team to be actioned at a later date, through our integration, we can implement a self-service model for some of those straightforward contracts. That way, I, as the salesperson, navigate to the opportunity for the client in question. I'm able to interact with the ContractPod system directly from Salesforce. And to generate a non-disclosure agreement, I click this button. Our two systems synchronize the data relevant to this contract type. And instead of me filling out a form, which is unnecessary for this straightforward agreement, after clicking that action and waiting a few moments, our two systems will synchronize. And now I, as the salesperson, have access to that initial draft of the non-disclosure agreement. And a secondary benefit, not only do I have quick access to that initial draft that I could return to the counterparty, but I also walk away with visibility into the overall workflow, the current stage of the process, as well as the activity by the contracting team that's pulled from the ContractPod tool and displayed within Salesforce. This not only gives me what I need very rapidly as a salesperson, but also promotes visibility into the work that's being done across different departments within your organization to smooth the friction between these departments and promote visibility and dispel ambiguity into what people are working on so that your teams can work more harmoniously together with every passing period. To bring this example to a close, I, as the salesperson, can then download the agreement that was generated automatically, deliver that digital file to my counterparty, and upon receipt of a redline version of this agreement, upload that updated version to the corresponding record within Salesforce, which will synchronize with ContractPod, alerting your contracting team and approvers that there is new work needing their attention and directing them to the associated record within the ContractPod system. A slightly different example, but I think one that is a good segue into a real life need that I'll illustrate here in a few moments. But our integrations don't stop here. For example, many legal teams receive requests from various departments in the business directly through their email and their inbox. If that's the case with your organization, I wanted to show you a comparable intake process just using the Outlook tool. And this is where we also have a plugin to bridge the gap between your email client and the ContractPod system. With this example, if I receive a third-party agreement directly in my inbox, or if a requester from internally reaches out to me directly, instead of me having to go out of my way to convert this into an official request within the ContractPod tool, I can accomplish the same thing in about 10 clicks or less using the plugin. That way, if I receive a third-party agreement along with preliminary details from the requester, one click for me to categorize this request accordingly, another click for me to upload this agreement into the repository and leverage the artificial intelligence to make my life easier when reviewing the contents. some data entry for categorization to capture the counterparty and details about our organization. And this, as a reminder, can be built to your specifications within our administrative vault. And finally, uploading the digital file that I received, having the AI review the contents to make my life easier from a pre-execution perspective, as well as an opportunity to upload any supporting documentation, which can help you piece together salient details about this agreement when we talk about the smart AI-powered repository within the ContractPod tool. A sneak preview for what to expect before we conclude today. After filling out some of these details, as extensive or limited as necessary, 10 clicks or less later, we've created a record within the ContractPod tool, which will engage the notifications and workflows that your team designs inside of the ContractPod system. That, in short, is our vision for all of you. When it comes to intake, acknowledging that software and tools must be flexible enough to meet people where they are currently at, whether it's existing tools that your organization has invested in, or ad hoc tools and behaviors that people are used to. Regardless of how you receive requests currently, we have different intake tools and avenues for you to capture what's important and convert that into an official record inside of the ContractPod tool, so you could benefit from the smart AI, the automated workflows, and the audit trail that's included within our tool by default. Colin, absolutely will make it a point to touch on templates within our system and how they're managed. An example of a workflow to show everyone here on the call how we can mold those to your specific needs. And I think this example of an AI review record will show you our playbooks, and I could speak to how we work with organizations to bring those to life based on this concrete example. What you've just seen me do, team, through the Outlook plugin, after receiving a digital file or a contract, I uploaded that agreement from within Outlook into the ContractPod system. And this is what we're looking at currently within the ContractPod tool, the resultant record, what your legal and contracting team would receive as they work on this request within the ContractPod system. If I scroll down towards the bottom of this page, this gives me an opportunity to explain ContractPod's approach and also show you how the playbook shines in a real-life example. At ContractPodAi, we work with you to understand the key risk areas that you pay attention to for a given agreement type. Those, for example, are the key obligations or clauses that you see listed on the leftmost column of this screen. ContractPod has an extensive library of key legal obligations that the artificial intelligence was trained on recognizing verbiage for across different contract types, industries, and different jurisdictions. That is how we're able to extract the language that exists within the current draft of the agreement directly from that document upon upload to the system. The ContractPodAi will comb through the entirety of the agreement, word for word, and it uses element classification to not just extract the language that appears under a given clause, but to recognize how different verbiage relates to these important clauses, even if they're scattered throughout different areas of the agreement. We know often with third-party paper specifically, attorneys spend a lot of time combing through the entirety of the agreement to pick up on these important themes because they're worried that there's a barbed reference buried deep within the document that might escape your attention at first glance, but something that materially impacts your organization's obligations and bottom line. With our approach, because of the element classification, the artificial intelligence is trained to recognize verbiage across the entirety of the agreement and is in a position to catch those barbed references, even if they're buried deep within the document. With this example, What we often see is this helps empower non-legal teams to make the first pass at red lines, especially for third-party agreements, because of the facilitated editor that you will gain by using the ContractPod tool. As a preview, after uploading the agreement, our tool combed through the entirety to pay attention to these key themes. It is extracting the language that exists within the latest draft of the agreement, and the color coding comes after comparing its findings with your organization's preferred language for each of these clauses. That way, a person without any legal training, such as myself or a member of your procurement team, moments after uploading an agreement can understand the material issues that are preventing you from accepting it as is, and arms me with the functionalities to quickly navigate to the areas of non-compliance within the document, and equips me with the functionalities to make some executive decisions. For example, I could quickly navigate to the counterpart section, review the latest language, and especially at the beginning of negotiations for a counterparty, I can replace the existing language with preferred verbiage from our legal team's playbook. Hidden behind roles and permissions, we could use this same functionality to allow for the insertion of fallback positions or pre-approved compromises. So as negotiations progress past the first round, if I need to make compromises with the counterparty, we have the opportunity to deliver pre-approved verbiage to the end user, enabling them to very quickly replace the offensive language with move forward verbiage while moving on to the next conflict. And this is what to expect when uploading an agreement. Our artificial intelligence will extract the current verbiage, compare this with your organization's playbook, and delineate the areas where you need to focus on when the pre-execution process for this agreement type. It also shows you the non-conflicts that could be functionally ignored. And so your team now is in a position to prioritize what needs to be negotiated versus what can be accepted as is. And this helps promote efficiencies instead of treating every transaction as a bespoke negotiation that eats up a lot of your team's time. With the current example, not only do I have the functionalities to replace language with pre-approved verbiage from our playbook, I also have the capability to make more substantive edits to the agreement as necessary, to accept the language as is, which could be hidden behind roles and permissions, or the ability to strike out any verbiage from the agreement. But with this facilitated editor, instead of that requiring a lot of expertise or personal experience to understand precedent from prior negotiations, this helps demystify the risk areas within an agreement, equips a non-technical resource with a facilitated editor to guide them to what's important, arm them with the tools to quickly reconcile the differences, publish a new draft, and return it to the counterparty so you can move on to the next priority instead of spending a lot of time with these risky activities. With that facilitated editor, after I make changes to the agreement within our tool, you'll notice that the artificial intelligence will rerun to reanalyze the document based on the changes that I've made, pick up the updated language based on the adjustments that I made a few moments ago, re-rank the contract in terms of riskiness after driving that comparison, which can, at the workflow level or with notifications, drive the appropriate next step or route this request to certain stakeholders for oversight and approvals. Another powerful aspect of our tool is the ability to tie the organic steps that your contracting team is taking to the automation that our tool can drive at the workflow level. Take a look at this. Once I click this button to finish the first round of review and engage my additional stakeholders, when I click this button, our software will update the status automatically and also update the toolbox to give me access to some new features. This is a built-in editor tool that, in our experience, really shines when trying to engage internal stakeholders and subject matter experts to review an agreement in real time. Instead of a sequential approach where you might make first edits to a document and then send an email to subject matter experts, which will then mean that you have to stitch together everybody's feedback into a comprehensive copy before delivering to the counterparty. This helps you get all necessary buy-in from everybody across multiple departments in a more elegant and efficient way. Visually and functionally, you will notice that this is very similar to Office 365. You have full editing privileges baked directly into the ContractPod tool. That way, after using the facilitated editor to make some initial changes to this agreement, I have more editing privileges within this editor and can continue the conversation fluidly with my colleagues across different departments. For example, inline commentary to ask subject matter experts pointed questions on whether this is acceptable or not, instead of me annotating things into a local copy, sending it through an email, and then collating responses after the fact. The benefit to managing all red lines within our built-in functionalities is as I make changes to the agreement and save those to the repository, our tool automatically handles the associated version history and audit trail for every transaction managed inside of the ContractPod tool. So record keeping is no longer on your contracting team's plate, but something that is automated by the tool simply by working and consolidating your activities within a system like ContractPodAi. I'm noticing that there was a couple of questions that have come in from the audience, so let me take a pause and address those. First question posed, does the in-house legal team set the risk score for each agreement? And Colin, you hit the nail on the head. So we've seen how we could train the AI to pay attention to certain risk areas, but I haven't actually spoken to the weighing and the scoring of those risks, which is what you saw visually a few moments ago. At ContractPodAi, not only do we understand the key risk areas that you pay attention to, but we're able to apply a score and a ranking so that the tool can automatically stratify your agreements by riskiness, and the workflow and notifications can inform key stakeholders if an agreement that you've uploaded is risky, if it's a medium risk, or if it's low risk contract type. The playbook verbiage, the key risk themes, and the scoring and weighting is something that your team manages within the administrative vault. Those are the functions that you see here within the backend administrative area. For organizations that have an established playbook in place for some of the agreements that you manage, this is where you can build out and operationalize your current playbook within the ContractPodAi tool. But for organizations that might not have a formal playbook in place, or for whom this is a new concept in its entirety, have no fear. ContractPod, as part of our recent enhancement this calendar year, has given you a starting point of playbooks that could be pre-configured and easily adjusted for organizations that don't have their own defined playbooks in place. So, Colin, yes, the scoring and the weighing is determined by client administrators and is fully configurable, part of what we set up during the initial project. The verbiage and the basis of comparison, if you have existing playbooks in place, can be fully replicated and digitalized within the administrative backend. And this is something that your team has access to manage and maintain autonomously over time. For organizations that do not have a playbook in place, but are still keen on benefiting from that facilitated initial review, we give you a starting point that you could easily mold to your specific needs and leverage within the first phase of partnering with ContractPod and using the ContractPodAi cloud system. The next question is a little bit of a different theme, but I have a feeling that a person saw this action in the toolbox. And so the question posed was, how many languages can you translate a contract into? Great question. For context, this translation capability is powered by one of ContractPodAI's software partners, Microsoft Azure. They have a very extensive library of real-time translation. And so within our system, this allows your contracting team to take the source file, whether it was in English or a different language, and translate that into one of Microsoft Azure's supported language sets. To date, I believe Microsoft Azure has over 80 supported languages that you could benefit when using this real-time translation functionality. But here I select a particular digital file, whether a supporting document or an agreement that I've received, and I'm able to translate this within moments into one of Azure's supported language lists. To volunteer a story in terms of how clients use this feature on the day-to-day, often the legal team has to work with their counterparts in other departments such as compliance for certain agreement types. My mind goes to, for instance, data privacy agreements, which are subject to regulatory requirements in multiple jurisdictions, some domestic here to the United States, but also regulatory requirements from different regions in Europe. Often, a part of complying with those requirements is working with local representatives to register the organization and demonstrate compliance for your contracting. Ergo, submitting applications to a Works Council representative in Germany. Instead of leaning on external resources or translation services to translate your files into the target language for your Works Council representative, many of our clients have made use of this translation feature to get a functional understanding of the contents within a particular agreement or supporting document, even if that file is not in their native tongue. That way, even if I don't speak the language, a few moments later, I can translate the document into my preferred language, understand the contents therein, and expediently determine the appropriate next steps. If that explanation invites a follow-up question or any more top of mind questions for that aspect of the functionality, please outline those in chat and I'll circle back before we conclude today. I hope that what you've seen with this tangible example brings a couple of these concepts together into a concrete scenario. If you receive requests outside of the ContractPod tool, no sweat, whether it's the Salesforce integration or a plugin through Outlook, we can bridge the gap, convert what you've received into an official request, and benefit from the automated workflows and notifications that are driven by ContractPod tool. That way, if I receive a third-party agreement, instead of me having to go out of my way to comb through the entirety of the contract and understand the material conflicts, that's something that the AI can help expedite when uploading the agreement into the repository. It can drive the comparison of its findings with your preferred language and what to expect, and equips a non-legal resource such as a member from procurement or even a person like me, with visibility into the things that we cannot accept, the rationale for why things are important or why we can't accept the language as is, and gives me a facilitated editor to quickly mitigate the unearthed conflicts, create a clean copy of move forward language, which can be returned to the counterparty without ever hitting the contracting team's plate. However, when the time is right, we also have the built-in functionalities for a more collaborative approach where the contracting team can initiate additional review, but still solicit feedback from subject matter experts and key stakeholders in different areas of the business to review key language in real time, capture their feedback as part of the system's audit trail, create a clean copy, and return it to the counterparty, whether through the built-in collaboration tool or sending the latest draft to the counterparty through our send email functionality built directly into the repository. I've mentioned repository quite a few times today, and so probably a good segue for us to talk about the recent enhancements that ContractPod has made to the smart AI-powered repository that you will benefit from if you partner with ContractPodAi. The AI-powered repository helps you unearth key trends across the transactions you have access to, whether in flight or legacy transactions that happened many moons ago. In no particular order, I wanted to introduce you to this area of our platform. And this is the repository view, where based on your roles and permissions, the tool will display some of the transactions that you have access to within our system. At first glance, this repository view displays some of the important agreements, but doesn't really help me understand my next steps. The great news is, one of the recent changes that we've done in ContractPod is we've armed you with the ability to slice and dice the data directly from this screen, so you could make sense of the transactions you have access to, unearth some key trends that might be top of mind, so you can then continue the conversation with your colleagues on what needs to happen next. To help build on that, for me to add additional attributes that might be top of mind to the repository grid is as simple as me adding the things that I might be paying attention to through a couple of clicks. So this is where I can, based on the details that are front of mind, supplement the information that the software displayed from the repository view. As I add some of these key attributes, I am then able to use those as filters to slice and dice the data set. This doesn't replace our reporting tool, but is a more organic way for you to strike while the iron's hot, and based on the things that are top of mind, slice and dice the data to find specific records so you can continue the conversation in a pointed way. To give you a tangible example, for me to update this view and display all agreements in effect within a certain time frame is a matter of me adding those attributes and then clicking on these filters to narrow the data set accordingly. An alternative example, but me being able to set up view of all affected agreements of a particular type with a certain counterparty is once again a question of clicks and seconds, as opposed to a data science degree and a giant headache for members of your legal and contracting teams. Moreover, we also recognize that different people review and visualize data differently. Although I'm used to a tabular format, we know that for better or for worse, many legal teams are still very used to thinking about agreements in a folder and subfolder way. With our tool, instead of forcing you to reconsider or forcing you to adopt one approach when thinking about your repository, we give you the benefit of flexibility. Whether you prefer a tabular format or something like a folder and subfolder structure that you're used to, replicating either within a repository is something that an end user can control within a couple of clicks and seconds. And that way, me setting up folder view of all agreements that I have on file with a particular counterparty is once again a matter of adding the attributes, applying the filters, and changing the view to my preferences. If I ever need to refer to this same information in the future, instead of reinventing the wheel every single time, I could save these views for future reference. And I'm also able to share these types of views with my colleagues within the system to drive alignment and make sure that we're continuing the conversation while referring to the same general trends. Based on this example, what I hope that you take away from this is that the software should not force you into interpreting data in a particular way. And so flexibility is important. And at ContractPod, we've updated the repository to deliver that flexibility to the end user, so you could tailor the application to your preferences and make this an intuitive tool to glean meaningful insights from, whether for your own benefit on a recurring basis or to drive alignment with key internal stakeholders and making sure that everyone's on the same page about what they're seeing and what they need to do with this information as a next step. Also, from this repository view, I am able to actually very quickly ingest a series of document types. So this is an alternate intake method in addition to some of the examples that I volunteered at the front end of the call through the integrations approach. That way, if I ever need to, on a bulk basis, upload multiple agreements and generate multiple requests, it's as simple as dragging and dropping the files into the repository view, categorizing those documents accordingly, which could be as extensive or as limited as necessary. And within a few moments, our tool can then convert these into associated records, which will drive the notifications and workflows that your team defines within the ContractPod software. The other area of the smart repository that I want to share with the group is arguably where the AI-powered functionalities shine front and center. This is a tool that helps me find specific details within the records I have access to, whether in-flight or legacy transactions. Instead of the repository view where I'm trying to find and determine certain insights, the cognitive search all begins with me looking for something specific. In this case, I, as a member of the legal team, am trying to understand my force majeure language within certain agreements that I have access to. As I type in a search term for whatever's top of mind, I want to very quickly explain that this is not a keywords-based search like it is with a Google, but instead, as I begin to type in a particular term, our software is going to suggest different permutations. And that is the software alerting me, whether I'm aware of it or not, that those different references exist in one way, shape, or form inside of the database. This puts your team in a position to catch misspellings of search terms or things that are very similar but differ from the exact words that you're using when leveraging the AI-powered search. Additionally, when I'm typing in a particular term, our tool uses natural language processing to not only look for the words that I'm using, but to also find phrases that are related to the same concept that differ from the exact words that I'm using. So with the current example, our tool is smart enough that if I run a search for force majeure, it will also pull up references containing act of God provisions because it recognizes that the two are thematically synonymous, even if only one reference exists within a particular agreement or supporting document. I think that will shine when I process the search and show you the results with this live example. Before I get there, I type in what I'm looking for. If necessary, I can apply Boolean logic to get very granular with the results that I'm referencing. I'm able to search across the metadata of contracts and supporting documents, or even inline within those documents themselves. And as you'll notice, I'm able to apply extensive filters to slice and dice the data based on what's top of mind. When I run this search, the tool is going to comb through all the records within the repository and will display a table of preliminary results for my review. What I really appreciate about the ContractPod tool when I was getting started, in contrast to many other systems on the marketplace, when I click into one of these results, our tool will not only show you an excerpt of the reference, but you'll notice this is the entirety of the document in question. So I have full visibility into the preceding and succeeding areas to make an informed decision on how we need to react. Additionally, if there is a reference that exists across multiple areas within the document, instead of you having to comb through different areas of the agreement, the software will steer you into the direction of where that reference was found, whether it in the latest version of a contract, in a subversion of an agreement, or even if it's within supporting documents that you choose to warehouse within the smart repository. Because, as you could tell with this example, our tool is fantastic at crawling through unstructured data. Whether that reference exists within a particular version of an agreement, a subversion that's on file, or within an email chain that's warehoused in the tool, with a couple of clicks and seconds, you're directed to that exact reference with full visibility into what was discussed, who was involved, and what the verdict was, whether for agreements that you're working on currently or things that happened many periods ago. I realize in hindsight that I can talk uninterrupted for this for many, many, many hours. And every organization is unique in terms of current challenges and aspirations for how to improve the legal function. So of all the notes that we hit today, if anything resonates, or if after seeing this presentation and digesting, you recognize that there is a process internally where legal is involved that could benefit from intake questionnaires to capture the salient details, dynamic workflows that can recognize when conditions are met and reroute the process accordingly through a more stringent path, automated notifications to key stakeholders to drive alignment and ensure necessary buy-in, whether you have simple processes or complex processes. I hope that what you've seen today gives you confidence that ContractPodAi is a good technological partner that has the features and built-in functionalities to support your program, as basic or as mature as it is, to take your contracting team to the next level and interact with various arms of the business in a more elegant way. On a closing note, to return to the administrative vault, I've opened up an example of the workflow designer that your team will have access to should you partner with ContractPodAi, because not only do you have flexibility in modeling your ideal process from start to finish, but making changes to those or creating a new process from scratch is something that is firmly within your control as an administrative user, and not something that a vendor has to do for your organization's behalf. So making changes to the program and adjusting as priorities shift is one of the things that's available to you within clicks and seconds, as opposed to an onerous activity that takes a lot of time. And finally, based on something that Colin has mentioned a little bit earlier, when it comes to template management and setting up the auto contract desk capability for the example that I shared earlier, if I click into the back end of our tool to where the template lives, this is where we'll upload your organization's existing contract template into the software and prepare that template with variables and dynamic logic so that our tool can ask pointed questions through the intake questionnaire, capture the relevant information for the contract type, and insert the relevant answer into the corresponding area of your digital template. A more advanced application of this same functionality would be for some of the dynamic sections of your agreement, where if there is an answer to a pointed question, depending on that answer, you might need to include, remove either entire clauses, portions of clauses, or sections of the agreement. So not only can we ask pointed questions and map the corresponding answers into the areas of your template, but we can configure your templates in a way to consolidate multiple versions of a particular contract type, ask pointed questions where, depending on the answer, our tool builds the right initial draft without any manual intervention. Now, let me at least do justice to the people that have been patient enough with this type of presentation to answer some of the questions that have not yet been addressed. Can we do side-by-side comparisons with language when it slightly deviates? Yes, the immediate answer to that question is yes. And that way, with the playbook functionality, not only can we compare the latest verbiage against draft verbiage of pre-approved language, but through guidance notes, we could also socialize different permutations of compliant or non-compliant text. Or if you receive something that seems to align with your preferences, but is worded a little bit weirdly, we are flexible in terms of the AI. We can have the artificial intelligence mark things as compliant while giving you an opportunity to correct the behavior after a more thorough look. Or those playbooks could also be built to compare verbiage from precedent gleaned from legacy transactions, as opposed to a playbook of ideal language. So Colin, we're flexible, but if that resonates, the devil's in the details. And so I would encourage us scheduling a follow-up conversation to understand that in fuller detail so I could highlight the relevant areas of our platform and provide some immediate assurances. I recognize with that I'm on borrowed time. So without further ado, Colin, thank you for giving me a forum to highlight some of the things we've been working on for the past 12 months. Turning it back to you.
Oh, you got it, Filer. If anybody's got any questions, we did start a couple of minutes late, but I wanted to give Filer, give you an opportunity. First of all, thank you very much for giving us such a detailed demo. But the question I have to you, because there's a lot of noise in the market with different contract management systems that all have, really good functionality across the board, right? But I want to, what is the differentiator in your mind for ContractPodAi, why somebody should choose you?
First, and this is something that I alluded to earlier, but it's the flexibility of the software. I was very impressed when I was getting started with ContractPod about how much an end user can manage, create, and adjust by themselves with on-screen prompts, guided wizards, and making a couple of clicks instead of something that's way more exhaustive. I know that especially compared to other tools, one of the things that I would ask potential vendors and partners is the degree of flexibility that I as an end user will have on the day-to-day. Because as requirements shift, one things that I cannot afford is unnecessary downtime because some changes have to be managed by a vendor as opposed to things that I can accomplish within a couple of clicks. Another thing based on today's presentation, it's the flexibility of the software to meet key stakeholders where they are currently working and not forcing those users to adjust their behaviors to work with a new tool. We could all agree that maybe what you've seen today could be beneficial and could bring relief to the contracting team. But if it's not easy to use and if it's not thoughtfully integrated into your existing landscape, this investment could be dead on arrival because of issues with change management and getting buy-in from all necessary stakeholders. That's one of the things that we're very proud to say is that our software is flexible and we could go a long way to bridging the gap between existing tools and processes from the benefits that ContractPod brings to the table at large. We didn't talk about this too much today, but outside of flexibility and outside of integrations, one of the things that separates ContractPod from other SaaS vendors on the marketplace is just that word. We don't consider ourselves to be vendors, but we aspire to be partners with all of our clients and organizations. And the distinction there is, instead of working with you during the initial project, giving you documentation, but then leaving the onus on your contracting team to make full use of this investment over time, ContractPod does not commercialize the implementation project, and we've included ongoing consultative and managed services directly into our proposals as part of our baseline cost. So not only are we in the position to understand your initiatives, consult with you on how to drive the outcomes that are important to your organization, but we're in a position to marry the functionalities of the tool with your objectives instead of the onus being on you to make full use of this investment on your own. Those would be the three things top of mind.
Thank you for that, Father. That was like, you know, I echo what everybody else said. It's that was a great demo. Really, really appreciate it. Anybody else? Any other questions? I don't think so. We give you a lot of opportunity. But if anybody wants a copy of the recording, I'm happy to send that on afterwards. I know Nadine and Laurie are two I'm going to follow up with. But if there's anybody else, just Shani, send it to you as well. But if anyone else, feel free to reach out and we'll send you a copy. Fighter, thank you. Attendees, thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your week, and look forward to keeping in contact with you. Thank you.